talks about industry frameworks to accelerate your data journey. Presented by Umran Rafi. Please put your hands together for Umran Rafi. He is Head of Data and Analytics from ENOWA, NEOM. Umran is a highly experienced director and enterprise architect with over 20 years helping clients start smart and avoid the many pitfalls at the start of in the midst of digital, data, and technology transformation. Currently, Umran is putting his data experience to work helping NEOM achieve its ambitious vision of a cognitive city with 100% renewable energy at lowest cost. Ladies and gentlemen, this masterclass holds a lot of activities, so be prepared. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. How's the energy in the room? Are you guys ready to think? So I've got 60 slides. I'm not going through 60 slides. So this is going to be very much up to yourselves in terms of how you'd like to get the most out of this masterclass. Just to give you a very little overview of myself. And this is just really to just inspire and tell you the kind of experiences I've had. I started my career in consultancy as a software engineer, and I kind of fell into data in 2005. I'm from the UK. And I joined a project working as a business analyst, doing process modeling. It was a big, large fleet management system, and there were 15 developers all creating this system, and nobody looking after the database. And I was like, well, what are you guys doing? OK, so I took over and became the database administrator. I did a pretty good job, I think. And the IT director said, Umran, we need a data warehouse. And I said, well, what's one of those? He said, don't worry, we've got this consultancy. They'll help you. And what happened, the consultancy came over, and the person who actually trained me up in data warehousing principles in 2005, he'd worked in the US with Ralph Kimball. And I don't know if the audience know Mr. Ralph Kimball from the 1980s. He was actually one of the first proponents of data warehousing. And he'd go out all across the US in the 80s and 90s talking about, this is how you build data warehouses. So when I first learned about data, it was actually best practice. And I've been very fortunate in my career in that I've worked as an independent consultant. I've always taken roles that I can't do and really pushed myself across all these kind of different disciplines, from being an engineer to an analyst to scrum master, project manager, program manager, architect, and various different kinds of architecture. And then when I was putting this slide together the other day, I was like, wow, I've worked in so many industries, and each industry has had about 4 or 5 different companies. What that's really given me is a real broad appreciation of all the things that are necessary within a data transformation or trying to get this thing right. Now I've joined a couple of months ago with NEOM. Can I ask, does everybody here know and heard about NEOM? Can I get a show of hands? OK, so it's just over half. So let me give you a little introduction to NEOM. So NEOM is a giga project, part of Saudi's 2030 vision. In all honesty, as you can imagine, NEOM will be much longer than 2030, but some of the key initial timelines are around 2030. And what people may not know is NEOM is a region around the size of Belgium. So it's a really large area right in the northwest, joining Egypt and Jordan. And there's 3 main cities, and those are the line. And if anybody's seen the marketing which has come now, the line is the one line, 170 kilometers long, 500 meters high, 200 meters wide, and a human-centered cognitive city. The second is Oxagon, which is a industrial city, where we're talking about seaport, and it's a floating city. And then third, there's Trojena, which is a mountain resort and tourist attraction over a beautiful lake. Now, what's core about all of these is that NEOM as a whole is made up of 14 sectors. And all of these, to make a cognitive city for the future, that's part of the 2030 vision, need all of these to speak with one another, What I work in is water and energy. And a lot of our focus is renewable energy. Water, taking water from the sea through water salination plants, and providing energy. And as you can imagine, for any city, getting water and electricity is pretty fundamental. And it started very, very early because even to support the people working there, they need the basic facilities. This masterclass, if anybody has any questions as I go through things, please just pop up your hand. You don't need to wait till the end. That's a little introduction into NEOM. So, like I said, put your hand up if you've got any questions as we go through things. So I think we're all here. We know that data is really important. It's how World War III will be won. But I think the key thing really is, in all of the experience that I've had over the last 16, 17 years, I see the same problems in each organization over and over again. And that's, how do we start this journey? How do we transform if we're in the middle of transformation? And actually, what's different? And, just here at the bottom, you've got like a couple of key groups that say similar messages. There's a big focus on the technology. We're talking about data lakes and platforms and big data platforms. The business is just crying out and saying, give it to us, we'll sort it out ourselves. We've got consultancies selling dreams. And then the execs, they want to drive value in the business. So, data science and artificial intelligence is really alluring. But these are very advanced capabilities. So I always kind of see it, it's like there's a war on data. And it's really difficult to get right. And what's really going on here is that you've got lots of activity across the business. So for example, imagine you've got a centralized data team and you've got a platform and they provide things to the business. Do they engage across the whole business to understand what's really important? Is it finance? Is it sales? Is it marketing? Is it operations? Where there's lots of programs going on and lots of data needs, and they come iteratively, one by one. Obviously, in a lot of organizations, there's decades of silos in either how people communicate or with IT systems, and there's legacy. That's a pretty tough situation. And then I think this one's the key one. Everybody's looking for the magic pill. I was just speaking with Dinodo earlier, and he was saying how many people come and say, oh, this great data virtualization platform, it'll solve all our problems. It's like, no, it won't solve your problems. How do we know that we're actually investing our money in the right area? What's most important? And we talk about being data-driven and data is really an asset. Well, what does that really mean? And I always give the example, jewelry's an asset, money's an asset. You don't just go throwing that across your house or across the streets. If it's really important, you look after it, you nurture it, you know what value it is, you put it somewhere secure. And then how do we know that we're doing the right thing in the right way? And this is probably the key thing here. The frameworks I'm going to present all allow you to accelerate your journey. Firstly, I've got to say it's actually a mindset thing. For a moment, just put aside the technology and the vendors. From all of my experience in transformation now, what I've really realized is if you get these three fundamentals right, you're actually on the journey. Now, if you think about it, data management, strategy, architecture, engineering, it's not really taught. You have universities now that will do data science courses. You don't have data management courses or degrees in that. So the industry as a whole is still developing and maturing. Even in the West, where we've maybe started that journey earlier, it's still maturing. So how do I know what good looks like? How do I really understand this discipline? And for me, the key thing is you've got to read, you've got to train, you've got to learn. And with that, see what works and come out of your comfort zone. Do things that are difficult to do. And this actually just builds resilience in people, in your teams. And then you build upon what works. So if you take a framework, use it for whatever purpose it's useful, and then adapt it to your needs, because it'll give you a good start. And this is really where you get the mantra of start small, fail fast, think big, all of these terms. But really putting it into practice takes time. You've got to have a certain attitude towards your career and your profession, that you're in this to really understand it and try it and get better at it. This is the key thing, and this is how maturity improves over time. There's no magic pill. As I mentioned, secondly, let's not reinvent the wheel. In the data circles, I speak to scientists and architects and vendors and suppliers, and a lot of the concepts of getting data strategy and taking value from data, getting it right, it's in many, many other parts of business management. And these are not new. It's not that special. Data science has been around for around 40 years. It was just called something else. Statistics have been around for a long time. Engineering's been around for a long time. Database theory goes back to the 60s and 70s. Strategy has been since Sun Tzu. It's been around for a long time. But we don't build upon existing domain knowledge. And, working with a lot of companies over the years, I just see that people go and, try and make it up from scratch. You're developing a new data governance program. Well, how do you get started? Well, okay, I think this is what we need to do, and I've read a little bit. This is going to be really tough. So a framework is just a basic structure. That's really all it is. If there's nothing else you take away from that, it's just a basic structure of a system or a concept or anything. And you use it to build upon. This is a key one for me, right? When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like nails. The more tools that you can arm yourself with, the different challenges, whether challenges in communication, right? You've got a project with finance, and they send you the requirements by email every single time, or they ring you up and say, look, I need this report. I'm like, okay, that's really good. But the definition of a requirement is, one, it's a need, and number two, it's documented. So if a requirement's not documented, it's not a requirement. And that's based on the BizBook, which is the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge definition. And the rules from these frameworks really is you don't need to make your own. And don't try and just kludge a single framework. Look at a number of them and see what works for your organization, where you're at, and what you can quite quickly, easily adopt that makes sense. Right, now, it's a scary slide. And this is where we're going to get a little bit more interactive. As I said earlier, this masterclass is for you guys. I've got lots of experience in lots of different areas, and my intention is just to share those experiences and learnings. So what I'll do now is I'm going to very quickly run through what's on this slide. And I'd like you all, I think you've got a notepad in front of you. Just note down the top 2 things that really interest you, that you think would be really good to just get a bit more of a deep dive. And the way that I've structured it, I'll present a particular framework, and I'll give you an example of how I've used it. And if you like, if anybody's got any certain challenges or issues or problems they're working with, feel free to stick your hand up, tell me about it, and we'll have a go and see how that framework could possibly help you. So I'll start just really from the left here. There's a number of data-specific frameworks. The first one there is CMMI, which is a world leader in maturity, process maturity, people maturity. In 2014, they released something called the Data Management Maturity Model. And that's really a structured way of gauging where are you at in your organization and what does the next stage of maturity look like for you, and then the next stage and the next stage. So it gives you quite a nice stepping stone. That's the first one. Second one is not really a framework, it's really a body of knowledge from Dharma. So that's the Data Management Body of Knowledge, which is I think they're on version 2 now, which is a very big encyclopedia all around the various disciplines within data. Third one, we have DCAM, which is also a similar kind of process-oriented capability, which is more on Basel principles and very much for banking. I don't know how many people are from the banking industry. Then there's enterprise architecture, which is an overall discipline, and capability maps in terms of how you structure and organize things in a more coherent way, which is not tied to any particular framework. And then there's a lot of others which are proprietary from Accenture or Deloitte or McKinsey. So that's the first one. So when you're writing these things down, just write down 2, and you can write 1.1 for CMMI, 1.4 for capability maps. Just think of it like that. And then there's a number of frameworks around strategy. So we've got the Object Management Group, which has the Business Motivation Model, which is all around structuring what's really happening in your organization, externally, internally. How do you develop goals and objectives, strategies and tactics? How does it all fit together? Then there is objectives, strategies, goals, and measures is another framework, which is a simpler framework, which allows you to simplify, right, these are the things I really need to do in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Then there is the business model canvas, BMC, which is a framework to really collaborate and structure what's the value proposition, what's really important in terms of developing your data business. And we can adapt that one. Then there's Gartner's IT strategy, which is, I've used that a number of years ago, which I found very useful in terms of developing a strategy with a step-by-step guide of which areas you need to cover. And then there's your general Porter's, 5 Forces, SWOT, PESTEL, all of these which are generally found in strategy management. Number 3, all around the operating model. Now, how many places I've been where everybody's developing the operating model, and generally it's usually the organization design. But the operating model is all about how you deliver value, what your strategy is trying to do, and how you deliver that strategy, and how everything works. How do you operate? So it includes everything. So with that one, there's something called the operating model canvas, which is a simple way of, at the high level, like, who are the key suppliers, what are the key systems, how does this whole thing work together, this whole system of the data organization, interacting with the business, how does that all work? There's another one from Gartner called the Int Operating Model, which gives you a very clear guide as to, these are the building blocks you need to focus upon, skills and structure. And then it also talks about how to implement it through pilots. And the third one is, over my experience, what I call the viable operating model. Having worked through these kind of operating model frameworks in the past, this is how I've developed it from a very architecture perspective. For me, obviously, I think it's superior, but we can have a look at that one. Number 4 is architecture. So all in and around architecture. So we can talk about the reference architecture, all the data components, your systems, your technologies. How do they all fit together? How do you make sense of them? Reference models. What does the data itself look like? What does it mean across your entire organization? How do you structure and organize it? And then there's a number of different architecture frameworks, which you may have heard, may have not. TOGAF is probably one of the most popular and common frameworks. And if we just mention architecture, it's just fundamentally how things are organized. You can have the architecture of this room. How does the wall support the ceiling? How is it connected? What kind of foundations are necessary to support that load? So architecture is really all about how do things make sense and connect together. And there's a number of frameworks in there. APQC is a classification framework, which generally around processes and tells you, right, you want to deliver data, or you want to deliver a new service, or you want to plan how to organize yourselves. These are the steps that you go through. And then the OMG and Archimate, UML and Archimate are more notations. And then ITIL and Kobe are very IT management-centric frameworks. So there's a whole piece around architecture. And finally, probably for me, some of the most interesting ones and most relevant, different project delivery frameworks, from waterfall to Kanban, Lean, program delivery, so Scaled Agile Framework, for example, Nexus. And number 3 is data-driven problem solving. So these are all techniques that you can use, value stream mapping, 5 Whys framework, affinity diagrams, lots and lots of different tools that you can use in solving certain problems, root cause analysis, how do you do that? And then number 4, different data modeling approaches. I'd like to get that out there, that there's not just one way to organize your data. And number 5, a couple of frameworks around governing. How do I establish controls over the behaviors and roles and processes and policies around data? So that's kind of a little bit of a run-through. Please, everybody, has everybody had a chance to write something down that I think will be interesting to deep dive? We have some facilitators. Where's our facilitator?
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. It's very beneficial. What I want to stress more on is the strategy. How can we expand on that?
You'd like to spend some time on the strategy piece?
Yes, please.
Sure, okay. Go ahead. There's a gentleman just here.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. That's an excellent slide. Thanks so much. I just want to understand a bit about visualization, data visualization, and that helps in decision support.
Sorry, say that again?
To help make the decisions or decision making, which will come from visualizing the data and understanding any predictive analysis or what if scenarios with the data. So where do you think this will fit into the frameworks that we talk about? And
so is it a question of understanding requirements? Is it about analysis?
Analysis.
Development?
Yeah. It's basically leading up to, coming from analysis of the data.
I don't think there's particularly frameworks specifically for that kind of analysis. There is one, actually in number 4, data modeling, business event analysis modeling.
Okay.
Is a technique. To be honest, I think it'd be very good actually to go through that, and not many people know about it. It's a very collaborative technique in terms of engaging with your stakeholders, using certain questions to elicit what is it that they're really after, and how you can develop models and develop those models to determine their business intelligence needs. So it may be useful to actually go through that one.
All right.
That's a specific technique for doing requirements analysis and modeling at the same time.
All right, thank you. Yeah.
Any others? Any other interests? Please, this one, gentleman here.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I think, I mean, looking at this on a high level, I just wanted to understand where does people sit into this? I mean, I understand there are different frameworks. Suppose we have a bird's eye view of getting work done or a project done within a timeline. How do we see people in those frameworks? Or, I mean, do we have to apply a different approach in terms of managing people across the processes?
So let me just try and summarize the question. The question is, how do we organize people to deliver certain initiatives?
Yes, I mean, each one of these frameworks requires different set of expertise, right? And each expert, it can be a consultant or an employer or project delivery member. And each framework supports team members within those frameworks, and each one is responsible. Say, for instance, if you're looking at data frameworks, this has dependency on the architecture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there are data analysts who are complaining about the architecture delay, which is also dependent on the delivery, right? So there are interdependencies, I understand, but how do I view the people framework here?
Okay, from the people side. I think it may be useful then to touch upon number 4, capability maps, which will help you organize and structure what needs to change, not just people, because developing maturity is around people, process, data, and technology getting better at the same time. So for example, if you've got, you can't drive, but you've got a Ferrari, it's not going to be much good. Or if you can drive really well, you've got a Ferrari, but there's no fuel, you can't do much with it. So generally, maturity or getting better requires all of these things to come together and improve. So it's never just a problem of, we don't have the right skill sets. It's generally, they don't have defined processes, or they don't have the right tools, or they can't access the right kind of data to make their job or make decisions.
True.
So I think it might be useful to touch upon that one then. So
Yeah.
we'll do a little bit on the capability mapping.
True, I think it all boils down to having the right thing at the right place with the right people, right? So
Yeah, it's a key point. Okay,
Sure.
so I think
Thank
we'll
you.
go with capability maps, have a little run through of the strategy pieces, and then I think let's go to number 5 in terms of the delivery. Sound good? I will be sharing the deck. There's quite a lot of material in it. Feel free to read it afterwards and get a flavor of all these different kind of frameworks. So I'm not going to go through all of them. So you were speaking around how do I improve, with a specific focus on the people. So capability mapping is a technique of organizing all the bits and pieces around data strategy, data governance, data quality, data engineering, BI analytics, data privacy, security, document content management. All of these disciplines or these capabilities, they need to get better. We know, for example, the team is too slow. They don't have the skill sets. It's generally not just about skill sets. They probably haven't got a clear backlog of work. Requirements don't come through to them properly. So capabilities it's a conceptual thing. A capability is conceptual. But if you think about it, it's like an ability that you may have. I can breathe, I can run, I can eat, I can do things. And similarly, an organization can do things, and these capabilities are made up of people, process, data, and technology as a whole. And if you want to make things better, you've got to improve all of these together. Like I said before, you can't have great, brilliant tools. You've got Informatica, brilliant tools, and people don't know how to use them. They haven't got the skills. Or they've got the skills and they haven't got the tools. They've got to come up together. So that's a process, now a capability. Now capabilities are very interesting in terms of that you can use them in lots and lots of different ways to kind of organize and structure things. So I've just taken a couple of things off the internet here, or ones that I've used before. So you can have capability maps for a bank, for an overall organization. What are all the things that need to be done? And how do they all need to be done at the same time? What's more important? What's it made up of? How do I break it down? So it gives you the top-level view of your entire business. And there are lots of capability maps for certain industries or certain organizations, whether it's banking, whether it's insurance. You can find them. There are ones, capability maps for, actually, I need an architecture function. Well, actually, what does that involve? Well, here's a capability map for enterprise architecture. I know you can't see it, but it's a capability map for solution architecture. Here's one I did with a bank a couple of years ago. This is how we organized. These are all the things that we need to do for data. So as a chief data office, this is everything that the chief data office got involved in, plus the entire organization, how they viewed what data management as a whole means. So for example, what we did is at the beginning, we looked at all the frameworks, and they decided we want to develop our own. So we had the chief data office working with data operations, working with security, working with architecture, and we got together and said, well, what is data architecture? Right, what is it? What's the definition? And what's it made up of? What's data governance? We've got a team of 30 people doing data quality. What is data quality? Can we agree what it's made up of? It's like a lot of things that you'll see in these frameworks, and with data specifically, a lot of it comes down to language. Do we have commonality of, I'm talking about this, I'm talking about a customer. Well, you've got a different view of customer to me. All of these frameworks actually allow you to just get commonality of language in terms of what we're talking about. And then this is made up of those things. So the way they cut it was this way. It's very similar to data management body of knowledge. Data management body of knowledge is not a capability-based framework. It's usually around activities. But we took that and then we worked it through, and it took around 3-4 months. But by the end of those 3-4 months, we were able to use this. We use it for strategic planning, for developing business cases, for saying which ones are we going to put money into, where do we need to put people? Well, actually, our data warehouse and BI architecture is really poor. So actually, we need some funding for that. We need some data warehouse architects or BI architects or whatever. It helped us just organize and structure. Recently, I've done this for a data and analytics office. And very interestingly, so imagine you've got a chief data office or you've got a data and analytics team somewhere central in the organization. Generally, you'll say, well, they do BI, and they develop our reports for us. Well, actually, these are all the things that function needs to be able to do. And looking at from the top, strategy, business architecture, performance management, maybe innovation, change management. They need to probably look after their people, look after their processes, define them, develop them, improve them. Generally, these three in the middle are where the core focus of data teams or data organizations, functions, focus their efforts, usually in the exploit bit. So you have a data engineering or a BI analytics team. That's great, but they don't know where the data comes from. They don't know if it's any good. They don't know how it's structured. They can't get access to the systems. Well, actually, you need skills in data architecture and metadata. They get all these tables and columns. There's no definitions. They've got to figure it out. So this is a capability map for a data analytics office. Generally, it's pretty generic. Most functions will need some element of these. Now, what we can do with this, by defining and mapping these capabilities against strategic objectives, so you can say, right, in the next 6 months, I want to establish data ownership. I want to have someone who's responsible for signing off if someone can access customer data. Right? You could just say, that's a very, very simple objective. That's what I want to achieve. Well, actually, now, to achieve that objective, what capabilities do I actually need? How good are they? How wide are they? What's the scope of them? And you can map them. The top left corner here is actually looking at those capabilities in the map before and saying what's their maturity from these 4 dimensions: people, process, data, technology, what's current and what's target. Well, we think it's, we just haven't got the people, we haven't got the skills, there's nobody there doing it. Well, okay, that's a 0. Or it's done very ad hoc manner, there's no defined process, or they haven't got the tools. By going through that process, we now go through a couple of steps, map them against objectives. And when we've done this recently, look what came out as the most important capabilities to focus upon. Most capabilities to really improve are generally around those 4 areas, whatever you're trying to achieve. A lot of it actually comes down to change management. It's about getting people to change their habits. For example, if you're doing agile, it's a big change to how you work. You haven't worked in this manner. Working with sprints and having a really clear, broken down backlog of requirements, and I'm going to do this, and I think it's going to take me 6 hours or 8 points or whatever. People don't work in that way, so it's very new and very different. Metadata is, for me, is like the most important capability in driving data. And metadata is the power behind the data. So for example, you've got name, Bob. Well, Bob is one value of data. It has name, okay, that's the title. It's alphanumeric, it has data, it has a classification. It then has, is it a compulsory? It has, what kind of field types can it have? There'll be around 100 different items of metadata for the name Bob. So it's actually all that gives you meaning and understanding of how to use customer name, for example. So metadata is generally the problem bit. You've got lots of data in lots of places. You don't know how it's defined. You don't know where it is. There's only certain SMEs know how it's structured. Usually that's a key focus there. And then just very quickly, this is a quick method, what maturity at different levels looks like. This takes time. And I think the key message I'd like to get across is manage expectations. Improving any of these things, it's like growing up. You can't explain infinity to a 3-year-old. They just conceptually won't get it. They're not mature enough. They can't jump, 1.5 meters high. They haven't developed the strength. They're not tall enough. It's a journey of getting better, and it takes many, many years. Generally, you'll find to move from one stage of maturity to the next, at the beginning, it'll be about 12 to 18 months, generally to move from 1 to 2. And every time you go up, add another 6 months. So be realistic about what you're really trying to do. We're not NASA, we're not Google. They've been doing it for 20, 25 years. They've gone through that process of changing this, trying these approaches, trying that, and maturing over time. Be realistic about what you actually can achieve. I'm going to just very gloss over this, but you can have a read later on. Here's some steps, how you actually do it in terms of figuring out what are the capabilities, how do I measure them, who needs to be included. That's something for you can have a little look at later. And this is a couple of examples that I've done in the past. Maybe this was about 6 years ago. I used the CMMI data management maturity model and went and interviewed the business, got some understanding, laid it out, created it in a spreadsheet, and then I turned around to the IT director at the time and said, look, our data management, this is where I think it's at. And I had evidence from the interviews of speaking to people to organize it. And then I could say, well, actually, what do we need to improve? So if I give you an example, platforms and architecture. Well, they had good tools, but it just was organized in a really bad way. You know, they were using Warescape, and this was probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And you know, Warescape is a pretty tough tool to use. If you're an engineer, it's really for business analysts. That was one way of doing it. This one was for a bank. And like I mentioned, we developed our own framework. And then we could turn around and say, right, actually, let's realistically, in the next year and a half, we have these concepts today in data architecture that we've got a data map. That's how we organize data governance across the organization. We've got this big Cloud Era data lake. We want to move to actually having data models. We didn't really have any data models. And it's not about one platform for just load data. It's actually a data ecosystem. So it just allowed us to be able to, you know, tangibly say, well, actually, what does it look like in a very, very concise way without all the details behind it. There's a lot of details behind all of these. And then we could say, well, in the future, we're really looking towards a open banking, common data platform, which is open with good exchange standards and APIs. And it's cloud native, so it's easily scalable and elastic. Now, we could just turn around and say, well, that's actually at a very, very high level. That's the journey we want to take. But just getting to move from there to the red to the yellow, that's going to take us a year and a half. Capabilities can also be used to just organize, changing over a long period of time. This was an insurer I worked with, and they'd agreed BI analytics is made up of these 6 things: operational reporting, provisioning, business performance reporting, data warehousing, discovery, and data mining. Now, you don't need to know actually what's in the boxes. Those were all different data sources where people would go and get data from. If you just look at the colors, the core focus changed. So they had 49 different places where people would go get data from. Lots of them. And most of them were all about operational reporting. Strategically, they wanted to change that and have more consolidated places where you'd get data for operational reporting. And that was just a high-level way of saying, well, we're going to keep this system, or we're going to get rid of that one, or we're going to migrate that one, and we're going to bring them together, da-da-da-da-da. And then I think this is the final one. Did this in a place where we looked at the overall capabilities and said, right, from a technology perspective, these are all the tools that are being used across these different technologies. And this at a high level, this is what the target state looks like. So it's not getting into the architecture of how things are organized and all the links and everything, but just in a very simple way on a page, we can say, well, we're going to get rid of that. You can see there's a lot of red in this organization that we wanted to move away from in terms of technology. And then the roadmaps would fit with that. Okay, that makes sense. Was there any questions anybody had around capabilities? Does it make sense? I know it's conceptual. It's a difficult thing to get your head around. Was there any questions on that one? No? Either everybody understood it or nobody did. Yes, this gentleman here. Hi.
Now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I would like to know whether you make any difference between information governance and data governance.
Okay, say that again? Difference between?
Information governance and data governance.
It's a good question. And I would say it's up to you to define. Come up with a definition. For me, they're actually 2 different things. So information management and information governance. If you stick into Google or you create a job advert for information management, you get a very different profile of person. Generally, information governance and information management are quite industry specific. And also, generally, they were about bookkeeping, record keeping, record of process activities, generally information management, documents. It was a lot around that. Data governance and data management is a little newer, but the key thing is get agreement on it. So, in these capability maps we were talking about, we went through a process of saying, actually, everybody's, like, nobody could agree what's business intelligence. What is it? We want to make it better, but how do you make it better if you've got a different view and I've got a different view? There was one here. Oh, man, there's a lot of slides. So by going through a process of discussion, now what you can do is you can go to like data management body of knowledge. How do they define it? Okay, great. Do we agree with that in our organization? Go speak to people who'll be involved in working with it. Create a little working group, have a couple of meetings and say, right, actually, can we come up with a definition and what's it made up of? Over here, when we did data governance, I didn't completely agree with how it was structured. Yeah, I would have structured it slightly differently. But it wasn't about being right. It was about all of us agreeing what it was. So we, in that organization, said data governance is made up of ownership, stewardship, working groups. I mean, for me, these are not capabilities, but it's fine. Policy management, issue management. So all the data issues in the organization, we will centrally collate them, and then we will push it back out to the business to then fix it with a plan. They had this thing called data certification. When they used to take data away, it had to be certified. There's a whole process and there's a whole operations function dedicated to certifying the data. And then regulatory awareness. That says, well, we're not, our data governance function is not about, enforcing the regulation. That's for, governance, risk, and compliance, or for the legal teams to do. We're not doing it. But we should be aware. So that's kind of how they defined what data governance was for them. I'll mention a data governance framework towards the end, which will be quite useful. It's a good one. I've used it, and I quite like it. And it gives you a definition of what's data governance and how do we go about implementing it. That kind of answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Great. Cool.
I also have another one. Do you see data management belonging to data governance or data governance belonging to data management?
Depends which framework you take. Different frameworks have a different view on it. So, for example, data management body of knowledge, it says everything for data, including data warehousing, architecture, strategy, governance, it's all called data management. Most frameworks say data management is the overarching thing for all of it. It's all involved managing data. In some organizations, people will say data management is governance, quality, maybe like the business glossary and metadata stuff. And some of them turn it the other way around. Data management is within data governance. It's like, okay, let's just agree it. That's the important thing. We agree this is an apple. It's not a pear. That's a good start. And then over time, you can refine that, but you refine that together. You go on that journey. Remember what I said at the beginning? It's a journey. So I would always say, be consistently wrong rather than right in a few places and wrong in lots and lots of places. The consistency is really the driving point here because you can make one change and everybody now benefits in one way. And remember, it's all about taking the organization on a journey rather than individuals by themselves.
Thank you very much.
Okay, which one was the next one? Somebody was speaking about strategy development. So we've got this, I'll do this very, very quickly. This is the business motivation model. It's from business architecture by the object management group. When we say strategy, first we've got to define what is strategy, what's its boundary, is it including the plans, the implementation plans and the roadmaps, or is it really just the direction setting without saying how you're going to then achieve it? The most important thing with strategy is actually just everybody agreeing this is the direction of travel, right? And if you bring in the consultancies, you'll get a good 200-300 slides. Is that useful? We could debate it. It's a matter of everybody going in the same direction. This is a good model which really gets you to really think about when you write down a goal, because anybody can write down a goal and put some words together. Is it coherent? Is it right? Does it, do the strategies that we're doing help achieve it? What's its alignment with objectives? It allows you to really get into the details of how these different concepts are really structured together. So it's a useful exercise, really starting off with what's motivating you, right? For example, in the UK, we had GDPR. It came along, big influencer. So strategically, that changed the nature of what we focused upon. Regulation came in, gave us a year to a couple of years to get compliant. Big fines if you don't. Well, actually, that then changed the whole strategic direction. Or new technologies come. When Cloudera first came on and Hadoop, they actually completely changed the paradigm of what people focused upon. But it's always starting off with what's motivating you, and then what are you going to focus on? You can't solve everything. You go through a bit of a process of maybe SWOT analysis, and then saying actually what are the means and ends? What do I need to do right now, and what do I need to do later? So it's a good framework for that. Here's an example. I've had to take some of the words out just for confidentiality, but we use this to structure and organize. Well, actually, from our drivers, one of the drivers was, let's go with one. There was two-speed business model. So it's two organizations. They're very closely aligned, but they're working at different paces. That's really making it difficult for us to organize, developing one central data model, for example. Well, what are we going to do about that? Well, actually, we had one of the key pieces was Objective 65, that's nice. Alignment, training, and communication. That objective had it within it that we need developed some change management. We want to bring some change management piece and get those communications sent out, a monthly newsletter, to make sure that we know. We'd set up some working groups that was linked to that driver, and then actually that came down into the data enablement initiative. So it became a line item all the way through. We could trace it. Now this is just, there's a lot of work gone into one slide to just show you what it is. But all of those things were now coherent. So I could turn around and say, actually, my plan that I've got, it's got traceability all the way to the strategy. So I've got an engineer and analyst working on this for the next 2 months. He can understand that he's helping the organization achieve that. And how many places have you been where people are working and doing things and they don't really understand how's it helping? How am I a part of this journey overall? So it allowed us to have really clear line of sight between the plan and strategically what we're trying to do. This is another framework. I'm going to just skip over this one, but this is a much simpler framework. If you're getting started with it, it's great. Have a read of OSGM. This one, generally, it allows you to just articulate and structure what exactly are you doing. And here's an example of that, right? So these are the drivers that left. These are the strategies that we're going to do. That's how we're going to measure it down there. So it allows you to give line of sight between objectives, goals, measures, and strategies together. It's a much simpler framework to use. I'm going to skip over this one just in terms of time. Gartner is a good one. I'm going to skip over that one. So I think the last one we will move. We've got about 10 minutes left. And I think it was around delivery. So we'll focus a little bit on the delivery aspects. Oh, wow. Okay. Here a bit. There you go. There's a reference architecture for you. So this is what your data platform really looks like. Right? There's a lot going on. In the pack, you'll find here's a reference data model. How do all the data connect together across your whole organization? A little bit about architecture frameworks, how they're different. Lots of architecture frameworks. A little bit about IT frameworks, how you can use them. So I think, is everybody familiar with agile ways of working? Can I get a show of hands if anybody's working with Lean, Kanban, Agile, Scrum, that kind of stuff? Okay. So this is quite new to people. So I think just traditionally people generally deliver projects and work in a very waterfall way. Which is, you do your requirements analysis, get your project going, requirements analysis, then you go through design, build, test, deploy, project closure. And there's many frameworks and certifications that you get, like Prince2 and PMP, PMI, MSP, lots of different frameworks for waterfall development, which is generally how most projects have been run. I think over the last 15 years, particularly in the West, Agile has become a different way of delivery. And when I'm interviewing a Scrum Master, I usually ask them, right, okay, you're a Scrum Master, you're certified in Scrum, you've been doing it for 5 years. Should I always use an Agile way of working? Half the time they say yes. And I'm like, okay, you haven't fundamentally understood the difference when you should be using more Agile. So for example, if I was going to say, let me outline for those who are not familiar, Agile is a way of working where you focus on very short periods of time and organize what you need to get done, get it really clear. So you've got a team of 6 people, and they have a very clear goal for the next 2 weeks. You take the work, you break it down, you have a couple of different kind of meetings to help you organize that work. They're called ceremonies. It has its own terminology. And then you focus on sprinting. So it's like you're running, right? The next 2 weeks, I'm going to run really, really hard and try and achieve this. And you also do quite a lot of estimation. So you say, well, this is going to take me about 3 hours. This will take me 5. This will take me 8. And then afterwards, you review and say, actually, you said it was going to take you 3, but it took you 2 days to do that piece of work. How do you understand how much work can you get through as a team? And they'll say, well, actually, I send emails and nobody replies to them. Okay, can we do something about that? We have retrospectives. And it's really focused on delivering in a short amount of time and working very closely with the business to say, hey, look, this is what we've done. Is this useful? Or would you like to change it? So it's a different way from the kind of waterfall. You kind of concentrate all your work to deliver something useful and then go through a process of different meetings that allow you to enable that. A lot of it is actually a change in mindset. Kanban is just a kind of conveyor belt way of working. Work comes in, what's most priority? Generally, IT service departments work in this kind of way. Tickets come in, right, this one's critical, P1, guys, let's get that one done, and then we'll go through the next. And then Lean is also a different way of working, which is very much focused upon continuous process improvement. So a couple of different frameworks there. The big difference really is about certainty. If you're going to build this clicker, would you do it? And I said, well, it needs to be black, it needs to be this size, this material, has these functions, I press this button, this happens. If I could give you a very clear specification, why would you create that in an agile way? You'd get some suppliers and give them the specifications, go build it. So it's really around variability, complexity, certainty. When a lot of time people don't really know what they want. And I like to give this example. People come with requirements saying, I want a pizza. I'm like, that's not a requirement, that's a solution, right? The business come to you and they say, I want a pizza. And you're like, no, your requirement's that you're hungry. And you feel like you'd like something with a bit more carbs. Fine, it could be a pizza, it could be, bruschetta. So generally, when the business articulate their requirements, they don't articulate requirements. In data world, they'll come along and say, I want a report which has got these rows and these columns. Like, brilliant. That's going to make it very difficult for me to come up with the right solution. What's the decision you're actually trying to make? So even just understanding requirements is difficult. How are we doing for time? Any questions around Agile and delivery before I move on to the last bit? Mike, please. One moment, she's just coming with the mic.
In data, it's very difficult to implement Agile. It's an ad hoc based. The workload is usually ad hoc based. We've tried Lean, we've tried Agile, we've tried Kanban, we've tried the mixture between the two. And it's the best, I think, method we found is having 50% Agile and then 50% of the...
Yep.
Is that the best?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So remember, you try the framework. It helps you organize how to sort things out. And then you take learnings from it. And then you will further develop. So it's actually a process that you go through. By all means, any framework that you've got, you take it and try and implement what works, and then grow and improve. So generally, this is what organizations find. They'll start with doing Scrum, very specifically, having a Scrum Master, getting the ceremonies, doing the retrospectives, doing everything by the book, and then they find, well, it takes up a lot of time, and it's not, we're not spending enough time actually doing our work. We spend too much time in the ceremonies. Okay, what can we do about that? In the retrospective, we'll say, well, actually, we need to change that. Maybe one of the things I generally do when I'm doing sprints is I'll sprint for 2 weeks and say, well, there's 1 week where we'll do all our ceremonies. Right? So the 2 weeks are focused on working, and we'll actually have a week where we can rest, figure things out, clarify the backlog, engage with the business, do our retrospectives, take our learnings, do all that kind of stuff, and then we'll do a second sprint rather than straight one after the other. But it's the process that's important. So absolutely, take Scrum, mix it with others, and see what works for your organization. Remember, it's a journey. So that's absolutely the way that you should use them. If you look at, there's a very interesting video on YouTube from Spotify. If you Google Spotify Agile, and a little bit of their journey when they started using Scrum back in 2011, and how they organized it and how they changed. So it's a good fun video. I recommend it.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Regarding the scale agile. I've been using agile for many years already, more in the IT area, together with the business. One big question I have is how to apply agile, so scale across the enterprise, particularly in finance for budgeting.
You don't ask easy questions, right?
This is something that is.
I think if you wouldn't mind, let's take that one offline. If you wouldn't mind, take that
sure.
one. That's a big one because there's lots of issues within that question itself that need to be broken down.
Sure.
Yeah, but it's a good question. And remember, the frameworks just give you line of sight, right? Generally, in your organization, you've got a way that programs are developed, and strategic planning happens. The change management function usually gets involved with the PMO and all that kind of stuff, and then it comes over to the data team and they say, right, okay, these are the things we want you to do. But it's a framework, and right now in NEOM, we are looking at using SAFe, but we know it's not going to work for us day one. So our intention is, in the next 6 to 9 months, we'll move in that direction. This is a good slide. It just shows lots and lots of different tools. I didn't get a chance to go through my favorite, value stream mapping, but by looking at process improvement, a lot of problems and things not working very well is usually within the process. There's lots and lots of different tools that you can use in different parts of your journey and process. So that's one for later. We haven't got time to go through the value stream mapping. I had a whole piece, because it's one of my favorites that I use in lots of organizations, of actually really massively changing the way that the teams are organized and actually how they develop. This was an example, as an FYI, of one place where I worked, where there it is, getting data into the data lake was really slow. It was a really, really big data lake. And the project started now then doing their own things. The financial crime transformation program started procuring its own platform and doing its own thing. It started going all over the place. So we basically got value stream mapping kicked off as an initiative. And they'd done lots of process mapping things in the past, and nobody knew the overall process from a requirement or a project wanting some data and actually having a production level in the lake. It was really, really difficult. And we went through that process. We did the efficiency and found actually you're working at efficiency of 4%, right? A day's work ends up taking you 2 weeks. Well, why is it taking 2 weeks? Actually, more. An hour's work takes you 2 weeks. So it's a process of using that. Had a little bit there. This is where the root cause of delays were. And then we actually completely changed how all the different teams were organized, what the processes looked like, and we got massive changes in how we developed. The team sizes were massively reduced, they were reorganized, et cetera, et cetera. The last one I did want to mention was this one. This is where my roots really are in modeling and data warehousing. And in so many organizations, I'm so surprised where people don't know the basic fundamentals of modeling and organizing your data. These are the kind of godfathers in data warehousing from the 1980s, Ralph Kimball and Bill Inman, and they have a slightly different view on what's a data warehouse, but they are very, very good guides in terms of how do you build it, what's important, what are the patterns that are common. You know, you've got lots of change history, how to organize all the tables and make sense of them. Dan Lindstedt came up with Data Vault about just over a decade ago, which is a completely different way of organizing all the data in your platform. And I'm a big fan of the last one, Lawrence Core, Agile Data Warehouse Design. I think we had a question around requirements analysis. So this method is called business event analysis modeling. Lawrence Core, he came up with it, I think it was around 2011. And he used to be a trainer for Ralph Kimball back in the late 90s and 2000s. And he then went off and said, right, Agile's becoming really common and popular as a way of working. Kimball's way doesn't really embrace that. And then he developed his method quite a while ago now. And the way that he works is, say, for example, you've got a BI requirement, and you go to the business. You actually get with the business, and then you use the 7 Ws framework to get the requirements out of them. So, for example, you start with, okay, well, who does what? Who and what? And the person will say, well, the customer buys a product. Okay, very, very simple, right? Customer, that's the dimension. Buy, that's an event. Product, that's another dimension. And going through this process, you actually elicit from them all of the main entities and all of the main business rules, and you do it together with them. And they've got a number of artifacts that you'll do model storming workshops with the business. So this is, you know, one, I brought Ralph Kimball, Lawrence Core into a few organizations to train people. It's a very good method of getting people together and actually understanding what the requirement is, and it doesn't stay conceptual. You get into the details of, well, actually, we've got this code XYZ that we use because there's only male and female, and we have lots of different genders now. It's changed, but we use the code XYZ to mean this. You get into the actual data and actually figure out, well, what we're going to do about it. It's not working. Very quickly, you're just finishing up this one. Another one, a good one to research for data governance. Anybody starting data governance programs or in the midst of a data governance program? Just yourself? Not many. Pretty important. Data governance is really all about controlling and having authority of data. There's kind of 3 approaches. You kind of do it. Traditional approach, command and control. Policy-driven, so you develop a policy saying everybody must, if they create a spreadsheet, you must register it, you have to do this, and you have to do that. The non-invasive data governance is by a guy called Bob Siner. And he says you take a very collaborative, community, people-driven approach. People are using data everywhere. They know that data, they know that spreadsheet that they've got, that they run operational processes on it. Find them and get them to tweak and apply standards to what they're already doing. It gives you a very good overview, so you can do your data governance program. You can do it horizontally, you can do it vertically. You know, like for example, you're setting up all your data governance committees down to, well, actually this is the support function. It helps you organize and structure all of that. I think and that's about it. The key message really here is, you know, work hard at it. It takes time. Thank you very much. Finally, if there's any other questions, any of the frameworks, any other bits? Just Mike, once more, please. There's another person there.
Given that in NEOM you have many sectors, how do you plan to harmonize different data strategies within these sectors?
Yeah, you got a lot of hard questions as well. I mean, there's a lot going on in NEOM, and there's not a lot I can say about it right now. You can imagine NEOM is a giant startup with a very ambitious vision. So there's a lot of work going on in terms of organizing all the technology and tools and data that we need. But it's a very complex machine overall, and there's a lot of people working at it. I've been there 2 months now, you know, and I'm just getting to understand all the different sectors, what's going on in each one. But you know, we can have a chat offline if you want a little bit more on that one. All right, cool. Go ahead. It's a dodgy mic. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't think it's on.
Hello. My question is, which tool and techniques you are using currently in NEOM projects, including, you can say, the database, which database you are using, or any DW tools you are using for NEOM projects.
You mean technologies?
Yeah, tools and technology, including the visualization tools like Power BI or SSE or Tableau. Which
at the moment, that's a difficult one to answer because there's lots. There's lots. At the moment, there's a tech and digital function that runs across NEOM. They're developing tools. They provide certain tools. There could be anything from Power BI and Tableau, Cloudera, Oracle, lots of tools in there. They're also developing our own tools. And then each of the sectors, they may take those tools or they may procure their own. So it's there's a lot of technologies that are being used and trialed and worked upon. And I think it's part of the journey that we're on. Over time, you will find that convergence. But I think it's the right thing at the beginning. You need to let people have some freedom in terms of finding their feet and organizing themselves, because you start governance too early, it'll just restrict innovation, it'll restrict working methods, and you can't organize that much that quickly. So lots of tools, I think, is the answer at the moment. Yeah, and I think just within the kingdom, I think there's a lot going on in terms of regulation and data centers and what we can hold in the, outside and inside and cloud. That conversation is still developing at a very strategic level. We have one which is called NEOM Authority, which is really looking at the regulations for NEOM and bringing those things in as well. Great, thank you very much. Any other questions? I'll be around. Come say hello, have a little drink, no problem. But thank you, everybody.